Right then, just driving home. So let's talk about designer study, because like loads of people don't like designer study because they don't know what they're doing. But designer study is actually quite straightforward, a lot of it. At least it is when you learn it. So we're going to learn it. So with designer study, you could get asked to do an experiment, a correlation, or an observational study. So we're not going to do all of those, we're just going to do one. We're going to do the experiment. So we get given a stimulus. So the stimulus that I'm going to give you now, sorry, just changing here. So it says, like, design a study to investigate the effectiveness of anti-anxiety medication on people with anxiety for their eyewitness testimony. Because you know from the memory unit that people who've got anxiety, or people when they're anxious, have poor recall on their eyewitness testimony. So it makes sense that if you've got high anxiety that you probably have poor recall. So we're going to do an investigation to test that hypothesis. things you get right on a questionnaire for your eyewitness testimony. So, like, I might get 18 things right out of 20 and you might get 12 right. That means that I've done better than you, but we don't know what we've remembered. We don't know much about it. Okay, so we're going to design this study and you're going to keep it simple. You're going to compare people who've had anti-anxiety medication with people who haven't had anti-anxiety medication. And you've got to sort of like put that across. That's what you're going to do, and you're going to do it really easily. You're not going to do like a week-long study. You're just going to do one study in probably like about an hour at the very most, which would involve the whole experiment. So you need to say what you're going to do. So you're going to say, I'm going to investigate whether anti-anxiety medication affects eyewitness testimony in people with anxiety. So I'm going to get some people with anxiety, like just say get a volunteer sample of people with anxiety, and everybody's going to watch a video of a crime, and afterwards they're going to be tested on their recall of that crime, that eyewitness testimony, through a questionnaire. It's going to ask them questions about that crime they've seen, and then you're just going to compare whether people who've had anti-anxiety medication before watching the video, do they have better recall than people who don't? That's it. That's all we're doing. So you need to put that across. But you're going to get most of your marks for these bullet points. So put a little header, what are you going to put? So experimental design, variables and controls, and underline that and say, so you've got to choose what experimental design you're going to use. Now, it doesn't matter which one you choose. It just, like for this, it doesn't specify. Choose what you want. You could go independent groups. You could go repeated measures. You could go match pairs. Now, I would say, unless they tell you to do match pairs, avoid it like the plague. Because it's really hard. It's really complicated. It's the best design, but it's flipping pain in the bum, honestly. So, whoop, somebody's trying to pull out on me there. So just ignore it. Just either go, unless it tells you do match pairs, go either independent groups or repeated measures. So there's advantages and disadvantages to both. So let's just say, for argument's sake, I'm going to go independent groups. I'm going to choose independent groups design, then tell the examiner what that means. So for my experiment, I'm going to choose independent groups design, which means that I'm going to have two different groups of people who will be in different conditions of the IV. So you've got different people. So half the people are going to take anti-anxiety medication and half the people aren't. So then you've got to justify your reason why. Why would you choose independent groups? So you choose independent groups because well, for two reasons really. One, it will like reduce demand characteristics, and the other reason is that it's going to lower those order effects of boredom, practice and fatigue. That's why when you only do one condition of the IV, you're not going to get bored of the task, which means that you are going to perform like not as well. So your performance will decrease. Whereas you could say also, like, what about the practice effect? What if you get good at, like, you've started practicing trying to remember things and you get better? So that will affect your DV, which is like how good your recall is, both. And that's what you need to highlight, that the independent groups design is going to stop that happening, because you're only doing one condition of the IV. You're not going to get bored, you're not going to get you're not going to get tired, fatigue, you're not going to practice. And say that the order, those order effects could have affected the DV, which is the how good your recall is. You could have also said it reduces demand characteristics, because if you only do one condition of the IV, then you don't know what the other condition is. So if you were in the condition without any medication, you wouldn't know that the other group's got medication. Whereas if you did both conditions, you're like, I've been given some drugs here, what's going on here? And you might try harder, show those demand characteristics. So that's why. So you've got to say, justify it. Okay, so that's your experimental design. And then your variables. Now for this bit, don't write in continuous prose, just put and materials. Now this is like a shopping list. It just means, what do you need in order to like carry out this experiment? So think about it like everybody is going to watch a crime, aren't they? So you need like some kind of video which might be on the internet, so you need internet connection, you need like a screen, you need speakers, you need paper and pen to do your questionnaire, or you might say the questionnaire is going to be on tablets, in which case you need some tablets, but you need that questionnaire somewhere, so you need to say those are the things that you're going to need. Okay. Oh, I've jumped, haven't I? Sorry, let's just go back to those control measures. So when you've said the control measure, which is random allocation, you then talk about general controls that would keep the experiment the same for both conditions of the IV. So what has to be the same so that we're only testing whether it's the anxiety medication that's affecting your DV. So things like the video, obviously, like got to watch the same crime. Talk about the fact they're going to, maybe get everybody doing it the same time of day. They might be in the same kind of setting. Because if someone's in a room that's got loads of posters, that might be distracting, and therefore that's going to affect the DV. So just mention all of the things that need to be kept the same. So you've got the control measure that you need from independent groups. And then you've also got general controls, things you'd have to keep the same. Right, sorry, back to those specialised materials and apparatus, that shopping list. Just put everything in that you need. So you'd need like, a laboratory room or something, like a plain classroom or something to do this experiment, as well as the video and the speakers and the internet connection and all that kind of stuff. So that's pretty easy and straightforward. Okay, the next bit, data analysis. You put that as your heading, data analysis. So you've got to make reference to descriptive and inferential statistics. So we start with descriptive statistics, and that means that you're going to talk about the two measures that you're going to use to describe your data set. And the two measures are called measures of central tendency and measures of dispersion. So choose a measure of central tendency and choose a measure of dispersion. Now your measures of central tendency are mean, median and mode. So looking for them kind of like this, well, it says the central tendency. So what's the central kind of point of that data set that describes that data set? So you'd say what you're going to pick, and then you choose your measure of dispersion, how spread out the data is, how varied. So you either use the range or the standard deviation. Now, because you've been told to create data suitable for the ordinal level of measurement, that means that really you should be choosing the median and the range, because they go with ordinal data. So you could say my descriptive statistics, I'd use the range as my measure of dispersion and my median for the measure of central tendency, because these things go with ordinal data. Bob's your uncle. So you've got your justification. Other justifications for those measures of central tendency and dispersion are the median. It's not distorted by anomalies because you're just getting the midpoint. So you probably want to say that as well, and choose the median, which is the midpoint of the data set for both conditions of the IV, to make a comparison. And I choose the median because it doesn't get distorted by anomalies, which are those extreme scores at either end of the spectrum. So that means somebody who's got like 1 out of 20 for their recall, or someone who's got 20 out of 20. That's unusual. So the median gets rid of those anomalies. The measure of dispersion, I choose the range. That just means you take the top score from the bottom score. And say, because it goes with ordinal data and it's quick and easy to calculate, you can use that as well. Now, if you've got ordinal data, it doesn't matter if you say I choose the mean. It doesn't matter. The examiners are there, and they're not there to trip you up or anything. As long as you can justify it, they're okay with that. So you'd say I choose the mean because it's the most sensitive measure of central tendency. It uses all the data set. They'll be like, okay, happy as a sandboy, that's fine. And you could say I'd use the standard deviation because it's the most sophisticated measure of central tendency. It shows with the spread of scores around the mean. It's not so easily distorted by anomalies. So as long as you justify it, that's okay. of this was 12 marks. You might need to listen to this again. I'll tell you what I'll do, I'll put the question in the description in the video below, so you can just like copy and paste that question. And if you want an answer for it, if you want a mark scheme, then you can contact me and I'll send you a mark scheme. And I'm going to charge you for it because I'm not a nice person.